The rain had been falling steady for hours, turning the winding road outside Asheville into a slick black ribbon under the dim orange streetlights. It was past 8, and most folks were already home, cooking dinner, helping kids with homework, or just sinking into their couches after a long day. But not everyone. On the shoulder of the highway, a sleek black sedan sat motionless, its hazard lights blinking like a tired heartbeat. Inside, a man in a tailored coat stared at the steering wheel, jaw tight. He'd been on his way back from a late meeting in the city, phone dead, GPS useless, and now the car had just quit. No warning, no sputter, just silence. He popped the hood and stepped out into the drizzle, cursing under his breath as cold water seeped through his shoes. He tugged at the latch, but the mechanism wouldn't budge. He wasn't used to this. Things usually worked for him. Doors opened, deals closed, engines purred on command. But here, alone on a wet stretch of road with no cell service, he felt strangely small. Just then, headlights rounded the bend. A beat-up Honda Civic, its paint faded and one fender slightly dented, slowed as it approached. It didn't speed past like the last 3 cars had. Instead, it pulled over a few yards ahead, tires crunching on the gravel. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt that read, "Built Not Bought." Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping in the damp air. She carried a small flashlight in one hand and a canvas tool roll slung over her shoulder. "You need a hand?" she called, voice calm but not overly friendly. Just practical, like someone used to solving problems, not making small talk. The man hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. He'd been expecting a tow truck, not this. But the rain was picking up and he was getting nowhere. "Yeah," he admitted. "It just stopped." "Won't turn over." She nodded, already walking toward the front of his car. Without asking permission, she reached past him and gave the hood latch a firm yank, something he'd clearly missed. It popped open with a soft click. She lifted the hood, shined her light inside, and went quiet for a moment, scanning the engine like she was reading a familiar story. He watched her hands, steady, sure, nails short and smudged with grease. She didn't fumble or second guess. She just knew. "Alternator belt's loose," she said after a few seconds. "Probably slipped off the pulley when you hit that pothole back there." She pointed with her chin toward a spot in the road he hadn't even noticed. "Happens more than you'd think, especially in this weather." Before he could respond, she'd already unzipped her tool roll and pulled out a socket wrench. In less than 10 minutes, while rain dripped off the brim of her jacket and pooled in the folds of her sleeves, she had the belt reseated, tension adjusted, and everything snug again. She wiped her hands on a rag from her pocket and closed the hood with a solid thud. "Try it now," she said, stepping back. He got in, turned the key, and the engine roared to life instantly, smooth and strong. Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with something else, surprise, maybe even a little awe. "Thank you," he said, rolling down the window. "Seriously, I don't know how long I'd have been stuck here." She just shrugged. "Happens to the best of us." He reached into his coat, pulling out his wallet. "Let me pay you for your time." She held up a hand.
"Nah, I was heading home anyway."
"Just glad you're not stranded." He paused, wallet still open. Most people would have taken the money, especially someone driving a car that old wearing boots with holes near the toes. But she didn't even glance at the bills. Her eyes were already on the road ahead, like she had somewhere to be. "Where are you headed?" he asked, more out of curiosity than anything. "East Side," she said. "Got a kid waiting on dinner." Something in the way she said it, quiet, matter-of-fact, told him everything. She wasn't looking for a conversation. She'd helped because it was the right thing to do, not because she wanted anything in return. He watched as she walked back to her Civic, opened the door, and paused just long enough to check her rearview mirror. Then she drove off, taillights fading into the rainy night. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, rain tapping on the roof. He thought about the meeting he'd just left, full of polished pitches, expensive watches, and people who talked a lot, but rarely did anything real. And then there was her. No fanfare, no expectation, just skill and kindness offered like it was ordinary. As he pulled back onto the road, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, he felt a little seen, not as a title or a bank account, but as a person who'd needed help, and someone had given it without asking for a thing. He didn't know her name. Didn't know where she lived or what she did for a living beyond fixing cars on the side of the road. But he remembered the way her hands moved, confident, capable, and the quiet pride in her voice when she said she had a kid waiting. By the time he reached the city limits, the rain had let up. The streets glistened under the streetlights, clean and new, and for some reason he found himself smiling, not because his car was fixed, but because the world still had people like her in it. He made a mental note. Next time his vintage Porsche acted up, he wouldn't call the dealership. He'd look for the woman in the faded t-shirt, the one who fixed things with her hands and asked for nothing in return. But that was for another day. Tonight he'd go home, dry off, and maybe, just maybe, call his sister. It had been too long, and somewhere across town, in a small apartment with laundry piled on the couch and a half-finished puzzle on the kitchen table, a little girl heard the familiar sound of an old Honda pulling into the driveway. She ran to the window, barefoot and grinning. Mom's home. Her mom stepped inside, damp and tired, but smiling as she dropped her keys on the counter. "Hey, Bug," she said, pulling her daughter into a hug that smelled like rain and motor oil. "Sorry I'm late. Had to help someone on the road." The girl didn't ask who. She just held on tight, happy to have her back. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the rent due next week, not the overtime she'd have to pick up, not the world outside their door. Just this, home, safe, together, that was enough. 2 days had passed since the rainy night on the highway, and life had settled back into its usual rhythm for the most part. The man in the black sedan hadn't been able to stop thinking about the woman who'd fixed his car with nothing but a wrench and quiet confidence. He'd tried calling roadside assistance the next morning just to ask if they'd sent someone out that night, but no, they hadn't. She'd been a stranger acting on instinct, not duty. That stuck with him. He wasn't the type to chase after people. His world ran on appointments, contracts, and carefully managed interactions. But something about her no-nonsense kindness, the way she carried herself like she'd faced hard things and kept going, had left a mark. So when his vintage Porsche, the one he'd restored years ago as a tribute to his late sister, started making a strange ticking noise from the engine bay, he didn't call his usual mechanic. Instead, he found himself digging through his coat pockets until he pulled out a crumpled receipt from a gas station near where they'd met. On the back, in smudged pencil, was a phone number and the words, "Cruise Auto, honest work." He dialed it before he could talk himself out of it. On the other end, a child's voice answered, bright and curious. "Hello? Hi," he said, caught off guard. Is your mom there?" "Mom," the voice called out. A muffled exchange followed, then the woman's voice came on, calm and familiar. "Yeah?" He introduced himself quickly, explained the car issue, and then added, almost too fast, "I know this is out of the blue, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to take a look at it. At my place. I'd pay your rate hourly, whatever's fair." There was a pause. Not suspicious, just thoughtful. "I don't usually do house calls," she said finally. "Especially not to... Well, I saw your car. You live up in the hills, don't you?" "I do," he admitted. "But I'm not asking for a favor. I genuinely need someone who knows what they're doing. And you knew that engine better than I did in 2 minutes flat." Another silence. He could almost hear her weighing it. The risk of driving to a stranger's home, the time away from her daughter, the fact that she already worked double shifts at the local garage. But then she sighed softly. "All right, but I set the terms. I come, I diagnose, I fix what's needed. You pay me by the hour, no tips, no extras. And if I say it's not worth repairing, I walk away clean." "Deal," he said without hesitation. They agreed on the next afternoon. When she pulled up the next day, her Civic looked even more out of place against the backdrop of manicured lawns and stone driveways. She stepped out in the same worn boots, a clean but faded flannel shirt this time, and carried a larger toolbox. He met her at the garage door, surprised to see her glance around, not with awe but with quiet assessment, like she was checking for trip hazards or loose gravel. "This way," he said, leading her to the Porsche tucked in the corner of his 3-car garage. It gleamed under the overhead lights, red paint flawless, chrome spotless. But she didn't compliment it. She just walked straight to the front, popped the hood, and got to work. For the next hour, the only sounds were the soft clink of tools, the hum of the overhead fan, and the occasional mutter as she traced a wire or tested a connection. He watched from a stool near the workbench, sipping coffee he'd made just in case she wanted some. She never asked for anything, not water, not a break. She just worked. Finally, she wiped her hands and turned to him. It's the fuel injector relay. Corroded contact, easy fix. I've got a replacement in my kit. Should take 20 minutes, he nodded. Thanks. While she worked, he noticed something he hadn't before, the ring on her right hand. It wasn't flashy. Just a simple silver band, thin from years of wear with a small emblem etched into it. It looked old, personal. He didn't ask about it. Some things felt too private for small talk. When she finished, the engine purred like it hadn't in months. She packed her tools, wrote down the hours on a scrap of paper, and handed it to him. That's it. He paid her in cash, exact amount, no extra. She counted it quickly, tucked it into her pocket, and zipped her bag. Wait, he said before she could leave. Would you consider coming back? I've got a few other cars. Classic stuff. They need regular checkups, and I'd rather trust someone who actually cares about them. She studied him for a long moment, not with suspicion, but with the kind of look someone gives when they're trying to figure out if you mean what you say. You're not just trying to help me out, are you? She asked bluntly. No, he said, and meant it. I'm trying to help myself. I don't want my cars ruined by someone who just wants to bill hours. I want someone who sees them like they matter. That seemed to satisfy her. She gave a small nod. All right, but same terms. And I don't do Sundays. That's family day. Understood. As she walked to her car, he called after her. Hey, do you take coffee? She turned, one hand on the door. Black, 1 sugar. He smiled. Noted. She drove off, and he stood there for a while, watching the dust settle on the driveway. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was respect, and maybe the start of something real. Back home, she found her daughter coloring at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration. How was work, Mom? Good, she said, hanging up her jacket. Fixed a fancy car. Got paid fair. The girl looked up. Was it the nice man from the rain? She paused. Yeah, it was. Did you tell him about Dad's ring? She glanced down at her hand, at the old silver band that had once belonged to someone who'd loved her more than anything. Not yet, she said softly. But maybe someday. For now, dinner needed making, laundry needed folding, and her daughter needed help with her math homework. The world outside their apartment was complicated, full of people with hidden motives and polished smiles. But here, in this kitchen with the smell of simmering beans and crayons scattered across the table, things were simple, honest. And that was worth more than any luxury car on a hill. The third time she came to the house, it wasn't just about the cars. She'd been back twice since that first visit, once to tune the carburetor on a 1967 Jaguar, another to replace worn brake lines on a classic Land Rover. Each time, she arrived precisely when she said she would, worked without distraction, and left without lingering. But something had shifted. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was comfortable, like two people who'd stopped pretending and just settled into being real. This time, after she finished adjusting the idle on the Porsche, he asked if she wanted coffee. Not as a formality, but like he genuinely hoped she'd say yes. She wiped her hands on a rag, glanced at the clock on the garage wall. It was just past 4, and nodded. Sure, black, 1 sugar. He smiled. I remember. They sat on the back porch, mugs in hand, watching the late afternoon sun spill over the hills. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. For a while, neither spoke. Then he noticed it again, the ring on her right hand. It caught the light in a way that made it look almost alive, like it held stories in its worn metal. He didn't ask outright. Instead, he said, "You always wear that?" She looked down as if she'd forgotten it was there. Yeah, she said quietly. It's not mine originally. He waited. My husband. He gave it to me, she said after a pause. Not as a wedding ring. It was his high school class ring. He'd worn it since he was 17. Said it was the only thing he ever owned that felt like it belonged to him. She took a slow sip of coffee, her eyes fixed on the trees in the distance. He died 3 years ago. Construction accident. Fell from a scaffold. They said it was quick. Her voice didn't break, but it softened like she was speaking through a layer of glass. At the funeral, his mom handed me a small box. Inside was the ring, resized to fit my finger. She said, "He wanted you to have it. Said you'd take care of it better than he ever did." She turned her hand over, studying the band like it might answer a question she hadn't asked out loud. I wear it on my right hand because it's not about marriage anymore. It's about memory. About carrying him with me without letting grief take over everything. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." Those words felt too small for something so big. Instead, he said, "You must have loved him a lot." "I did," she said simply. "But loving someone doesn't end when they're gone. It just changes shape." He looked down at his own hands, clean, uncalloused, used more to signing papers than turning wrenches. "I lost someone too," he said, surprising himself. He rarely talked about it, not because it didn't hurt, but because no one in his world seemed to understand that kind of pain. "My younger sister. She was 16. Leukemia." The woman didn't flinch or offer empty comfort. She just nodded like she knew exactly how that kind of loss carved a hole in you that never fully closed. "I was in college," he went on. "Thought I could fix everything if I just worked hard enough, made enough money. Like if I controlled enough of the world, I could keep the rest of it from falling apart." He gave a dry laugh. "Turns out you can't buy your way out of grief." "No," she agreed. "But you can build something good around it. That's what I'm trying to do for my daughter, for myself. Not to forget him, but to honor him by living well." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need filling. Somewhere in the woods, a bird called. The wind rustled the leaves. Later, as she packed up her tools, he walked her to the door. "Would you be open to looking at a few more cars in my collection?" he asked. "I've got a '59 Thunderbird that's been sitting too long. Need someone who knows how to listen to what it's trying to say." She smiled faintly. "Cars talk if you pay attention." "I'm starting to believe that," he said. Before she left, he added, "And if you ever want to bring your daughter along, when it's not raining maybe, she's welcome. I've got a workshop bench she could use, and I think she'd like the old radio I've got in there. Plays static like it's music." The woman hesitated, then nodded. "She draws cars all the time. Says she's going to design them when she grows up." Then she's already halfway there. As her Civic disappeared down the driveway, he stood in the garage, surrounded by machines worth more than most people's homes. But for the first time, he didn't feel proud of their value. He felt grateful for the woman who treated them like they had souls, and for the quiet honesty she'd brought into his life without even trying. That night, he dug out an old shoebox from the back of his closet. Inside was a faded photo of his sister, grinning in a hospital bed, holding up a handmade get-well card. He hadn't looked at it in years. He sat on the floor for a long time, just holding it, letting the ache sit with him instead of pushing it away. Meanwhile, across town, the woman tucked her daughter into bed. "Did you have a good day, Bug?" "Yeah," the girl murmured, half asleep. "Did you fix the red car again?" "I did. Is the nice man sad?" She paused. "I think he used to be, but maybe he's starting to feel less alone." "Good," the girl said, snuggling deeper under the covers. "Nobody should be alone." Her mom kissed her forehead and turned off the light. In the quiet dark, she touched the ring on her finger, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a promise to keep living fully, kindly, bravely, and somewhere between grief and grace, two people who'd been walking separate paths began to walk a little closer, not toward each other, but alongside, side by side in the same direction. Weeks turned into months, and what started as a simple repair job became something steadier, something real. She came by every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, sometimes with her daughter in tow, who'd sit at the old workbench in the corner with a sketch pad and a box of colored pencils, drawing cars with wings or engines that ran on sunshine. The man, no longer just the nice man, but someone with a name she now used easily, would bring her coffee without asking, and she'd nod thanks without looking up from the engine she was elbow deep in. Their rhythm was quiet but solid. No grand gestures, no over-the-top kindness, just trust built in oil stains, shared silences, and the kind of respect that doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. One afternoon, while she was replacing a distributor cap on a vintage MG, he leaned against the garage door frame and said, "You ever think about having your own place? A shop, I mean." She didn't look up. "Every day. Why haven't you?" She wiped her hands on a rag, then sat back on her heels. "Money's the short answer. The long one's got a lot of parts. Permits, insurance, finding a space that won't get bought out by developers next year. Plus, I've got a kid to feed and a roof to keep over her head. Taking that kind of risk? It's not just about me anymore," he nodded. He understood risk. He'd built his career on it. But this was different. This wasn't about profit margins or market timing. This was about dignity, about creating something that mattered not just to her but to others like her. What if it wasn't all on you? He asked carefully. She gave him a look, not suspicious but cautious. I don't want charity. It's not charity, he said. It's investment. You've got the skill. You've got the heart. What you need is a little runway. I could cover the startup costs, the lease, the tools, the licensing. You pay it back when you're ready. Or you don't. Either way, it's yours. She studied him for a long moment. Why? Because I've watched you teach my mechanic how to diagnose a misfire without tearing the whole engine apart. I've seen you explain carburetors to my gardener's son like it was a story, not a lecture. You don't just fix cars, you help people understand them. That's rare, and it's worth supporting. She was quiet for a while, staring at the floor. Then she said, if I do this, it's not just a repair shop. I want it to be a place where single parents, especially moms, can learn the trade. No fancy degrees needed, just hands, heart, and a willingness to get dirty. Then that's exactly what it'll be, he said. They shook on it right there. Grease on their palms, no paperwork yet. Just a promise between two people who'd learned to trust each other the hard way. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, site visits, and late-night planning over takeout containers in the garage. She found a small lot on the east side of town, a former tire shop with peeling paint but solid bones. He handled the legal side quietly, making sure everything was in her name with zero strings attached. When she asked how he wanted the agreement structured, he just said, "You'll know when you're ready to pay it forward." That's payment enough. Her daughter got involved too. She painted a sign on poster board that read, Cruise Garage and Learning Hub in bright wobbly letters and taped it to the front window the day they got the keys. For real? She'd asked, eyes wide. We're really doing it? We're really doing it, her mom said, hugging her tight. Back at the hillside house, the man started spending less time in boardrooms and more time at the local community center. He'd never been the volunteering type, but after hearing her talk about how hard it was for single parents to find training that fit around childcare, he reached out to the center's director. He didn't write a check and walk away. Instead, he offered to mentor teens interested in engineering, teaching them basic diagnostics, how to read schematics, even how to change a tire. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to be useful. One evening, as she packed up after a long day working on the shop's layout, he handed her a small box. Inside were a set of custom wrenches, each one engraved with her daughter's name along the handle. She's going to be the next great builder, he said. Might as well start her off right. The woman didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of crier. But her eyes got soft in a way that said more than tears ever could. Thank you, she said. Not just for this. For seeing us, he nodded. You made it easy. She still clocked in at the old garage 3 days a week. Still packed her daughter's lunch every morning. Still checked every receipt twice and turned the thermostat down at night to save a few bucks. But something had changed. She walked with her shoulders a little straighter, not because she had money now, but because she had hope. And someone who believed in her enough to step back and let her lead. And he? He stopped checking his watch during conversations, started listening more than talking, began to understand that success wasn't just about what you accumulated, but what you helped grow in others. One rainy afternoon, much like the one where they'd first met, they stood together in the empty garage space, watching water drip from the roof into a bucket they'd placed near a leak. It's not perfect, she said. No, he agreed, but it's real, and that's better, she smiled. Yeah, it is. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, something new was already taking root, built not on luck or wealth, but on the quiet, steady work of two people choosing to show up, again and again, for something bigger than themselves. The morning of the opening, the sky was clear for the first time in days. Sunlight poured over the freshly painted sign above the garage door. Cruise Garage and Learning Hub. The letters bold and bright, painted by hand with help from a dozen neighborhood kids. Inside, the space hummed with quiet energy. Workbenches lined the walls, each one labeled with a name tag. Tools hung in neat rows, not because they were expensive, but because they were respected. In the back corner, a small classroom area held folding chairs, a whiteboard covered in diagrams of engine parts, and a coffee pot that had already been refilled twice. She stood near the entrance, wearing clean coveralls and the same silver ring on her right hand. Her daughter buzzed around like a happy bee, placing name cards on chairs and adjusting a display of student sketches pinned to a corkboard. Cars with solar panels, trucks that could float, even a motorcycle with a built-in ice cream freezer. "Mom, do you think anyone will actually come?" the girl asked, suddenly nervous. She knelt down, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "People always show up when something real is happening," she said. "And this? This is real." By noon, the place was full, not with reporters or investors, but with neighbors. Single parents with tired eyes and hopeful smiles. Teens who'd never held a wrench but wanted to learn. Retired mechanics who brought old toolboxes just in case someone needs them. Even the man from the hillside house was there, but he didn't stand at the front or give a speech. He leaned against the back wall near the tire rack, arms crossed, watching quietly as people greeted each other like they belonged. He didn't bring a ribbon to cut. He didn't hand out business cards. Instead, when the crowd settled, he walked over to her and handed her a small cloth-wrapped bundle. She opened it carefully. Inside were the custom wrenches he'd given her weeks ago, now polished and ready. But nestled among them was something new. A key. Not to a car, but to the shop itself. "I had it made," he said simply. "Figured you should be the one who locks up at night." She didn't say much, just nodded, tucked the key into her pocket, and squeezed his arm. That was enough. Later, as the crowd thinned and people drifted into the classroom for the first demo, a lesson on changing oil without making a mess, he found her outside, taking a rare quiet moment on the curb. She held a paper cup of coffee, steam curling into the cool air. "You did it," he said, sitting beside her. "We did," she corrected gently. He smiled. "All right, we did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a group of teenagers laugh as they tried to identify spark plugs from a tray. Then he asked, almost casually, "Can I ask about the ring again?" She looked down at her hand, turning it slowly in the sunlight. "You remember what I told you?" "I do. But I think there's more." She took a breath. "After the funeral, I couldn't wear my wedding band. It felt like pretending he was still here. But I couldn't take off all of him either. So I started wearing his class ring. It reminded me that he wasn't just my husband. He was a kid once, full of dreams, scared of failing, proud when he fixed his first bike. The ring, it keeps him human. Not a ghost. Not a memory frozen in time. Just him." She looked at him then, really looked. "It reminds me that love isn't about what you have. It's about what you leave behind in people and actions and the way you treat the world after someone's gone." He didn't answer right away. He thought about his sister, how he'd spent years trying to outrun the pain of losing her, only to realize now that the best way to honor her was to live with the kind of kindness she'd shown everyone, even when she was sick. "I've started mentoring at the tech center," he said quietly, "teaching kids how to build simple circuits, troubleshoot basic systems. One of them asked me last week why I do it. I told her it's because someone once showed me that fixing things, real things, matters more than owning them." She smiled. "Sounds like you're leaving something behind too." Trying to. Inside, her daughter ran up to the open doorway. "Mom, Mr. Lee says he'll teach us how to rebuild a carburetor next week." "Tell him we'll bring donuts," she called back. The girl grinned and disappeared again. He stood, brushing dust off his jeans. "I should go. Don't want to overstay." "You're not overstaying," she said. "You're part of this." He paused. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad my car broke down that night." "Me too," she said. "Not for the car, for the chance." He nodded, then walked back toward his car, but not before stopping to admire a new drawing taped to the garage door. It showed a red Porsche and a blue Honda parked side by side, with two stick figures holding wrenches and a smaller one in the middle holding a pencil. At the bottom, in careful letters, it read, "Our team." He didn't take it, but he memorized it. Back home that evening, she sat at the kitchen table with her daughter, going over the day's receipts. It wasn't much yet, just enough to cover next month's utilities, but it was a start. Her daughter colored beside her, now designing a mom mobile with a built-in snack drawer and a seat that turned into a bed. "Do you think Dad would be proud?" the girl asked suddenly. She didn't hesitate. "Every single day." Later, after bedtime, she stood on the porch looking up at the stars. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight, warm and familiar. She thought about how far she'd come, not because someone saved her, but because someone saw her, believed in her, and then stepped aside so she could build her own path. And miles away, in a quiet house on the hill, a man sat at his desk. Not reviewing contracts or checking stock prices, but writing a letter to a community college about funding a new auto tech scholarship for single parents. He signed it simply, without titles, without fanfare. No one became rich that day. No one fell in love. There were no dramatic twists or sudden windfalls. Just two people who'd been shaped by loss, who chose to respond not with bitterness but with generosity, who understood that the most powerful thing you can do in this world isn't to rise above others, but to lift them up alongside you. And somewhere in Asheville, under a sky full of stars, a little girl dreamed of engines and kindness, and a garage that wasn't just a place to fix cars, but a place where people fixed each other one honest day at a time.